So we were flying by the seat of our pants a little bit. I've got no income. I've got to go build this business. Knowing when you could bring in a hire came from understanding the foundations of our income. You were always, as an organisation, what felt like an extension of our team. You cannot do everything, you cannot be all things to all people. I would view the relationship ultimately as a little bit of sleep insurance for me. What Grenfell James actually did for us is they helped give us that peace of mind.
Hi, I'm Hannah Watson from Grenfell James. I'm here with Chris Wood, the Managing Director, and one of our clients, Lewis, who's going to talk about the growth and exit of his business. So Lewis, would you mind sort of explaining where we sort of joined in our relationship from your business starting and at what stage it was at?
We were in our infancy when we first got together with Chris. I think we'd just gone through the first 12-month cycle. At that stage, we were pretty much a startup. We'd hired our first couple of employees. We were looking to build out a management structure that would really serve us well in the long term. There was a recognition from my side that we had a goal that we wanted to hit, and that goal was always, at the point of starting the business, we wanted to build it to sell it. So it was never a journey for us where we were thinking, okay, we're just going to kind of put one foot in front of the other. It was very much a well thought out plan that we wanted to create this structure very early, that we would become a business that another business would look at and say, yeah, that's a really good potential acquisition for us. I think, you know, we'd gone through the initial 12-month cycle, found ourselves in this position where, from a financial standpoint, we needed a little bit of help. And that was where we turned to Chris, having had a previous relationship with one of our senior people that we brought into the business, a chap called Dave.
So what were the main financial challenges that you were facing at that time?
You might remember this conversation very well, actually. Dave, who eventually ended up becoming our managing director, started life as a non-exec director type status within the business. Him and I sat down and actually looked at where we were at from a financial standpoint after the first 12 months and kind of laughed about it, because it was literally written on the back of a notepad where we were saying, well, that's our biggest client, this is where we're at. I think that we're turning over this amount. But the reality was we didn't have a very good handle on exactly what cash flow looked like, what the high points and the low points would look like for us in the bank. So we were flying by the seat of our pants a little bit, which is typical for a startup, but we kind of recognised that we needed to, you know, wrangle control of that situation, and that we couldn't build a business just kind of licking our finger and holding it in the air.
I think having the visual on cash flow, you know, profit and loss, and the balance sheet at that startup stage is so pinnacle, but it's also sort of gets moved to the bottom of the to-do list because you're starting a business and growing it and bedding in employees that you've never had before and things like that. So it kind of gets lost in the ether. I think sometimes we see it's sort of the last thing that gets looked at when it's so important, especially months 6 to 12 of where's that financial year going to be looking likely to be. And I think you had a real clear vision of 6 to 7 years of exit, growing it to potentially sell.
We did, and we didn't really have a great deal of, or I didn't have a great deal of experience in dealing with some of these things. So inevitably your financial lessons, I was 26 when I started the business, your financial lessons at that point is kind of running your own house, so to speak. You're used to kind of working to what's coming into your bank account, how do you pay your bills. When you put that into the context of running a business, some of these things are new to you, and ultimately, you know, committing to hiring an employee, looking at, you know, commitment with subscriptions, some of the things that you might need as a business while still trying to win clients. It was a new balancing act for me. And I think when we look at things like profit and loss, for example, I understood that you needed to have more money in the bank account than you were spending, but fundamentally some of the accounting principles that we needed to drive within our business, the experience on my part wasn't there. So it was very much something that I think Grenfell James helped shape, rather than being a reactive accounting team or a reactive financial team. And that really helped kind of educate me as I went through the process, as much as it helped the business.
I think from memory, it's probably just before COVID when we sort of first met each other, wasn't it?
We had our last pint before COVID.
We did, you're absolutely right. And I think from those conversations, it was evident that what you really needed to get your sort of ducks in a row so you were ready for ultimate exit. So I think the first things that we started to do together when we were working was to build your financial infrastructure, so to speak. So I think we introduced a new software package and other measures, just the simple stuff to ensure that we've got the right platform for you moving forward. And then looked at things like income recognition policies and things so that you would be ready when that knock on the door for the sale came along.
For me, reflecting back on those conversations, it was really about bringing some of your experience to the table as an organisation, and some of those things that you just talked about, an income recognition policy. It was almost as a person that kind of starts with a mindset of I just need to go out and win clients. That's the way that I will grow the business. And you have this formula, you have this philosophy of whatever your business does. You want to go out and operate on the principle of serving your clients well. You're not sitting down thinking about what's my income recognition policy going to look like? How's that going to be shaped for the future? So for us, we ended up in a situation where we were having those types of conversations with you about why we needed to have them, how that would represent us in a process of potentially selling or being acquired by another business. And I think for us, it allowed us not to have to reshape things when we were too complicated or too far along in our journey. So whilst it was early in our life cycle that we had some of those conversations, we understood the importance of having them early and just how much of a headache it would actually save us further down the line. So that's definitely fair.
Yeah.
And I think that's the depth of our team and the experience, and having gone through, with clients previously, growth, exit, whether that's succession, family, transferring businesses through generations, or MBOs with internal, sales, etc. It's sort of knowing what a potential buyer or what position of a company needs to look like to be ready to market, and knowing that at the start and getting simple foundations at the very start in place means you're not sort of scattergunning trying to get everything ready ahead of a sale. If an offer came on, along, we see that sometimes, don't we, where they're always going to market and they're not actually ready to go to market.
No.
And it's simple things like you were the business at the start, and it's sort of how do you strategize getting yourself in a place where there is a business there and you're sort of not in the business, you're outside of it and working sort of on it rather than in it, so that there is something there to sell that's not going to tie you in for a long, 5-10 year aspect as well. I think we see that quite a lot, is people want to sell their business, but sometimes they are the business. So it's not just sort of the financials, I suppose.
You brought in good people along the way.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's creating something tangible that somebody would want to buy, and I think having that basic understanding of you've got to get your business to a point. At least for us, selfishly, we had that mindset that we wanted to sell. Some businesses don't. But notwithstanding it, some of the principles of growth came from understanding the financials of your business. So knowing when you could bring in a hire came from understanding the foundations of our income, understanding the foundations of some of the expenditure that we had to go out, when these things would actually, come to pass, the behaviour and patterns of clients and income. All of these things were for us incredibly important to the decision making, at what point we felt we were comfortable bringing in people to continue to support the growth. And that really, from my standpoint, helped me feel comfortable that we were making the right decisions as a business. Because I think inevitably as a founder, you do worry about, committing to cost and committing to further growth, because you've gone through this huge period of risk in your life where you said, okay, all of the responsibilities that I have today, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to basically do something completely different. I've got no income. I've got to go build this business. And to move to a point where you've got through that first gate, you've got some clients, you've got some income, you still feel incredibly exposed. And I think that's where what Grenfell Jones actually did for us is they helped give us that peace of mind that we were able to make good informed decisions based on understanding our financials. I think it's fair to say you were always, as an organisation, what felt like an extension of our team. So we worked very closely with you. You were almost colleague status with us, where I would view Grenfell Jones as being our finance department as opposed to being our accountants. And I think that relationship is incredibly important, because if you build up that level of trust with somebody who is external, carrying all the experience that you folks have, and you're able to bring that into your business at the fraction of the cost of bringing in a CFO, you're actually benefiting your business hugely. So for me, it wasn't just those pillars and those foundations that we put in place. It was the continual evolution as we were able to lean on your experience to continue to grow.
So Lewis, what made you decide to work with Grenfell James?
Experience, knowing that Grenfell James had that experience within the organisation to take us from where we were as an early phase startup business, just getting going, building our infrastructure, knowing that they could carry us forward and build those principles, those foundations within our business to a point of selling. We knew that you'd been on that journey many, many times with other clients, so it was a bit of a no-brainer. You go where the experience is. And in addition to that, you have to work with people that you like. So Chris and I met, we hit it off, and I think working with people that you like, that have good experience, that come at a reasonable cost, a little bit of a no-brainer.
I think with the team, we bring sort of a depth of well-established bookkeeping service level, and then you've got sort of the accountants level. But I think for us, it's adding the cherry on top, and in terms of the experience that we've got across our team, and with you, Chris, in terms of, as you say, we've already been through those cycles historically, and we sort of can preempt, and hindsight's wonderful, but making sure that everything is in the right place at the right time. You're not onboarding too much cost at the start that your cash flow is going to be too tight to grow. I think that's, we see that as well. You onboard loads of depth in the team, but actually, as you say, you don't have the sales and the income there to service it. And I think sometimes that's where a startup can fall down quite quickly. So it's having that visibility of the forecasting and the cash flow model, but also that advisory piece on top, I think, is the bit that you mentioned we plug in with you and your team, and we're not just reactive. We like to be very much proactive and work with you as what your goals are and where the business wants to be and where you want to get it to be.
Yeah, and it evolves, right? So for us, it started off as a conversation, getting some of those principles right. And it was kind of an unveiling of additional services at the right points that we had the opportunity to, exercise. It wasn't forced upon us, but there was kind of a natural evolution of, if you do this right, you're going to get the business to this point, and then you might need us to support you a little bit, closer in certain areas. So of course you need the actual bookkeeping side of a business, right? It starts there. But from an advisory standpoint, we went on this natural journey where we actually got to experience different parts of your business continually. So for example, Chris would actually come in and sit in on management meetings with us. He would arrive with a management pack, and we would look through, some quite intimate aspects of our numbers. Grenfell James helped with one of our employees who we felt was a key hire, and we wanted to get them to a point where they could actually realise working a little bit closer to the business. So from a taxation standpoint, you end up in conversations around those types of things. So I think ultimately it's that journey that you go on. It doesn't just start and stop with the service that you initially engage on, but actually there's the opportunity to really sort of grow together and understand that you can access the things that you might need further along, rather than just sort of select somebody to do your bookkeeping today and then have to re-establish a new relationship 2 years later when you need something else. We felt with Grenfell James, we were stepping into a journey where we get everything that we needed, start to finish.
I think for me, what you touched on earlier is really rewarding and gratifying to think that you considered us to be an extension, if not part of your actual team. I felt that as well, and it was great to go on that sort of journey with you from when I first met you to when you sold it. And I think we did do some good things along the way. I think what you just touched on was the EMI scheme that we put in place for one of your key employees, which panned out well in the end. I think being part of your team was key.
Yeah, and I think you understood as a result of that, when we think about understanding the business, you're able to be a better advisor if you understand the business more intimately. So if you're just turning up once in a blue moon, having a conversation with somebody, you're saying, look, what's happening in your business? You're coming at it blind. Whereas I think we got to a stage where people at Grenfell James understood by first name some of our employees and some of the, the journey that they were also going on. So I think it's just about creating a relationship that enables that trust, enables you to do your best work, and as a consequence for us to be able to realise the outcomes that we want as a business.
I think, of course, there's like the compliance, the tax efficiency and structure and things like that. But for us, it's the having that full holistic approach on the business, because if, like you say, if we're just dropping in and out and we're saying, oh, maybe do it like that, we're not really seeing the ripple effect of the repercussions of that. We're saying do that change or implement that and step out again. If we're not fully involved and have that sort of full overview on the business, that could have a domino effect elsewhere that, from a maybe non-financial implications. So it's having those discussions and, going through the strategy and making sure not only the financial strategy, but the business strategy aligns so that it drives that growth and that forward thinking, I think, because as I say, we could come in and just say, oh, do that, but not really have any sort of thought process or even any visuals on the ramifications that could have across the business. And that could be from culture to team morale to, logistics and things like that. So I think it's key having that full holistic overview in the business.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this is where, from a personal standpoint, knowing that I could pick up the phone and have conversations intermittently that would suit me, and were at key moments for us as a business, whether you've just won a really big client in between your management meetings, that you're then speaking to somebody at the end of the phone who really understands what's going on. It just makes life so much easier. So I would view the relationship ultimately as a little bit of sleep insurance for me. It wasn't just a case of having to try and build a business with the people around me, and then deciding separately whether the things that we've agreed line up with our financial goals. It kind of all just came as one, and you keep everybody abreast in that circle that kind of needed to know and contribute to your journey. So I feel like we did that very well sitting here at the end of that journey.
And I think our fixed fee, you're talking about picking up the phone, celebrating the wins if you want a big client, as well as updates along the way in between those monthly management meetings. We don't charge for that. It's that's part of our service, and it includes us sort of being part of that additional team. I think some people do see big bills come through for additional phone calls or additional meetings, and for us it's just, especially when you're in that growth period, knowing exactly what your commitment is monthly, including our fees, it helps just have that clarity on that cash flow.
It brings certainty, doesn't it? And certainty when you're running a business is kind of what you thrive on. If you've got certainty around clients paying bills, around the bills that you've got going out, it enables you to continue to reinvest in your business. But I think, when we looked at the relationship as a whole, that certainty was very nice. We never, expected to get some surprise bill, like you were dealing with lawyers. But actually the number of times where, just I would call Chris offhand and just say, look, I just want to have a bit of a chat about what's going on. And understanding that, as an organisation, you're not just this big faceless machine, that there are people there that are willing to listen, willing to spend time with you, and don't necessarily put a value to that and say, oh, well, you called me for an hour whilst I was in the car to talk about something very niche in your business, or in your personal life. I felt like we actually got that support wholeheartedly from the business, where it wasn't just about we are a vendor servicing something for you. I felt like you had a vested interest in us as people, as a business, and wanted to see us be successful.
And I think especially if you're, a single business owner, and you're on your own at the top, it can be quite isolating.
Sharing the risk
is
is kind of what you're doing in those types of conversations.
Yeah.
Someone to bounce stuff off and just sense check and get a bit of sort of reassurance sometimes.
But definitely, and somebody who, and this is where you strayed from just being, financials, accountants, whatever sort of terminology we want to put on it, to almost friends. But, from my side, almost. You were kind of close advisors, and that's the way. When I say almost friends, that's the way that I would view it. It's that you are, sort of far enough outside of the emotional aspect of running the business that you can actually make certain observations and you can give pieces of advice that in relative terms were really, really useful, just useful observations based on what you're seeing in other businesses, based on how it feels to be a founder, based on how it's going to feel at certain points in your journey. We had one really sort of excitable management meeting that you'll probably remember, where there was a lot of stress and a lot of panic around the level of reinvestment that we were pouring into the business at what was quite a crucial time in our growth journey. And there was a little bit of irrational thinking, which is, what if that client doesn't pay and that client doesn't pay and that client doesn't pay and the world collapses around you? And Chris was actually very good at just sort of bringing back a little bit of sense and, you know, sort of cooling things down and say, look, based on experience, that's unlikely to happen. It's possible, but it's not probable.
It's awareness, but it's also being a sounding board, isn't it, for sort of an outside perspective to help support in, but also having that knowledge and depth of knowing the business so well, knowing the functionalities internally, as well as the financials from an external point of view.
So we obviously did quite a lot of work together along the way to get you ready for exit. But when exit, all the conversations about exit actually started and you went into the due diligence process, how did you find the support that Grenfell James provided?
So it was very good. Ultimately for us, again, or for me as an individual, this was my first time. And generally for a lot of people who are in my position or have been in my position, it's the first time. So I think, again, not to, you know, recover old ground, but it was about leaning into your experience of kind of knowing the sort of journey that we were about to embark on, and understanding that there would be a lot of work that you would need to do together. But I felt very comfortable that we'd invested heavily along the way together to ensure that we had a structure in place that was very clean. And I know that lots of businesses are very complicated. I feel like we did a good job of taking the complication out of due diligence for the acquiring party because of just how we'd framed us as a business, the financial profile, the way that we'd done things. So it paid dividends really that we'd obviously put that groundwork in, and that was really down to you folks as opposed to it being, you know, something that we drove. We knew that that's where we wanted to get, but actually you helped us get there before we actually arrived at the point that we were ready to sell, which ultimately then made it very easy that as we arrived at a natural point of sale discussions, we were able to embark on sale discussions in a fashion where we could volunteer information in relation to our business that would enable parties to put a valuation across us, to open the conversation. I think one of the things for me as an individual that went through that process that really stood out is you assume that perhaps your business is like selling a house, and that, you know, ultimately there is some valuation that you can pick up. You could go onto Rightmove and say, here's my house, it has so many bedrooms, it has so many square feet, what are you going to give me for it? As you venture into that process, you start to understand that it is very, very complicated to derive a valuation against your business. And some of that is based on experience of other businesses, what the market is saying. So there is a little bit of Rightmove, if you like, in there. There's also the additional aspect of how enticing is your business to another party. And ultimately, there is a little bit of a game that is played, you know, between buyer and seller, or buying parties and potential seller, to get to a point where there is enough commitment from both sides to enter that due diligence process. I feel like we just had everything to hand to enable us to handle that negotiation, if you like, to get us to a point where we could say, okay, we're happy to have a conversation with somebody there and we're happy to nail down into the point of due diligence. And I think when we got to due diligence, again, knowing that you'd been through the process before gave us that degree of certainty that all of the financially related questions you would just be able to hammer for us. And I think as a relatively small management team, knowing that we could actually just fold that across to you as an organisation gave us peace of mind, because it is one of the most stressful processes that you might ever go through.
And I think, as you mentioned, it's your first time going through a sale and an exit. That due diligence list, when it comes, can be quite overwhelming and quite significant, and, you know, and time consuming, I suppose, as well. So having that, you know, pretty much prepared knowing ahead of time that that was sort of on the cards, getting everything established and ready and prepped, was then not, pretty much pick it up for the shelf and give it to them, but it was pretty much for us able to be able to support you and leave you to deal with, the higher level stuff rather than the administration element of that due diligence process. There you go.
You're still trying to run your business at the same time as well. And I think this is something that, most folks overlook. When you're a business of the size that we were at, you're still very much in the thick of trying to acquire new clients, trying to grow your business still. You still have all the same problems that you had yesterday before you started on the sale journey. So as you work through that process, knowing that when that due diligence list arrives and you get data room access, that's 500 plus questions, that you could just say, look, anything that's financial and tax, we could just move that over there. And it's not to say that there aren't conversations that need to take place, but the reality is the support mechanism that was there enabled us to actually, wholeheartedly pass that over to Grenfell James and say, look, we know that they're actually going to do a really good job at getting after answering some of these questions for us because they understand our business so intimately.
Lewis, what advice would you give to another business owner that's trying to manage everything?
So I think ultimately delegation is key. It's a really, really important part of growing your business. You cannot do everything. You cannot be all things to all people. So the sooner that you recognise that there are certain areas of your business that you can actually not give away, but you can hand over a level of responsibility for to other people, the sooner that you're going to grow bigger wings to fly. So for me, it's get comfortable with the idea of bringing in really, really strong advocates for you, whether that is an external party like I had with Grenfell James, whether it's somebody internally, and I had a few of them within our business that, I was able to bring in or pushed towards our eventual objectives. You really have to get comfortable in it not being a solo show and saying, look, actually, I'm not amazing when it comes down to understanding financials and putting together bookkeeping processes and putting together management packs. So I'm just going to give that away to somebody who's very, very good at it. So it's the art of delegation.
I think in that startup stage, you mentioned you are pretty much wearing all the hats in the business. So you get a bit of exposure, but then you need to step away from that, you mentioned, and become sort of high level, have that overview and control. But as you mentioned, delegation of the doing of the elements that you might not enjoy or you might not be good at. And I would think it's always a strong advocate if you're hiring people that are better than you, because that's going to make life and the business growth so much easier, and relieve those pain points.
Yeah, 100%. I think we ended up going through a bit of a cycle where we were very cautious about the level of investment that we would make in certain areas. If I look back on our journey, how could we have gone quicker, done things better? I'd have hired you folks much quicker. I think, had we known you personally at that stage, we'd have hired you at the start. That's one of the things that we could have done. When you're going through your recruitment process, lining people up that can take over the responsibility for some of these things and seeing a journey for some of those people, I think is incredibly important. Whereas as a business owner, you do get sucked into this kind of reactive, we've won a really big client and now how are we going to service them? And we've got to grow around it. And there is a little bit of that has to take place. But I think ultimately, if you start to see the growth and development within your people, to take ownership of some of those areas, and you see the growth and development in some of the external relationships that you have, that's actually going to help you grow. Some of them were really easy for us. Compliance, for example, you bring in external compliance support. Financials for us actually ended up being very easy because we brought in very, very good people. But the sooner that you understand that you cannot do everything in a growing business, particularly if you're building to a point of sale, the better that actually is for you, because you cannot be a one-person show and say to another business, look at this great business that you're buying, because they're not buying a business at that stage, they're buying an individual.
Yeah, I think that's key. I think people miss the importance of bringing in good people in terms of the potential value at the end.
And also, you're sharing stress. So as you arrive at the point like we did when we got to diligence, we actually had several people across the business that were, inputting information, for example. It is a very, very lonely show when you found the business. I would imagine it is even more lonely if you're the only person dealing with all those due diligence questions. So ultimately, I think you bang on there. You need to be in a position where actually you're sharing out some of your responsibilities, and that is the way that you grow a very diverse, very successful business, and you de-risk as well as a business, because you're actually then not 100% reliant on one particular factor of your business. You're able to say, well, we're a pretty robust business that if one area isn't perhaps doing as well, we can go in and course correct that, but there are other areas of our business that are doing very well.
Whatever stage your business might be at, if you're looking for a financial partner to help grow or potentially maybe even exit, then please do get in touch.